In a world ruled by fear, one name was whispered in hushed, terrified tones: Kellen the Unbroken, the Alpha King. A giant of a man carved from granite and rage before whom every other alpha bowed and broke. For a decade, his rule was absolute. His heart a frozen fortress no one could breach. They said no woman would ever warm his bed, for no woman dared to even meet his gaze. They were wrong. Out of the weakest pack, from the deepest shadows of despair, one lone Omega stepped into the light. She wasn't an alpha, a warrior, or a princess. She was just a healer with nothing left to lose. And she was about to bring the most powerful werewolf on earth to his knees. The name of the Alpha King was a curse on the lips of the weak and a prayer on the lips of the ambitious. Kellen the Unbroken. He had taken the throne of the combined territories a decade ago, not through lineage, but through pure, terrifying force. His predecessor, a council of alphas, had squabbled while their lands fell to famine and rogue attacks. Kellen, then just an alpha of the remote Blackwood Ridge Pekek, had marched on the central seat of power, the Onyx Citadel, and challenged every single council member. One by one, he had defeated them, his monstrous gray wolf forming a thing of nightmare and legend. He was a giant, even in his human skin, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with a breadth of shoulder that seemed to block out the sun. His hair was the black of a starless night, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm chips of ice that saw everything and revealed nothing. He ruled with a fist of iron. Tributes were harsh, laws were absolute, and mercy was a forgotten word. Under his reign, the territories were stable, the rogues were annihilated, and the packs were secure. But they were also suffocating. This suffocation was felt most acutely in the smaller, less prosperous packs, like Silverstream. Their alpha Alistair was a man whose ambition had long outstripped his courage. He pretended and postured within his own territory, but trembled like a leaf at the mere thought of the annual conclave of fealty, where every alpha had to present their tribute and renew their oath to the king in person. It was in the heart of Silverstream that Soph lived, an Omega in the rigid hierarchy of the wolves. Omegas were the nurturers, the caregivers, the lowest rung of the ladder. They were to be protected, yes, but also controlled. They were not meant for politics, for defiance, or for courage. Sephora, however, had been born with a spirit that chafed against her designation. She was the pack's most gifted healer, her knowledge of herbs and fuses rivaling that of wolves 3 times her age. Her hands, though gentle, were clever, and her mind, though quiet, was sharp as a shard of obsidian. Her quiet life was a constant gnawing worry over her younger sister Anna. The girl was frail, afflicted with the creeping lung sickness that stole her breath and painted her lips a terrifying shade of blue. The cure was a rare high-altitude flower, the moon petal. It grew only on the slopes of the king's own mountain, Blackwood Ridge, and the tithe Kellen demanded each year stripped their pack of the resources, hunters, and coin they would have needed to trade for it. The king's stability was costing Soph's sister her life. This year the harvest had been poor, and a blight had swept through their livestock. Silverstream had nothing left to give. The night before Alpha Alistair was to depart for the conclave, Soph was gathering what few herbs she could find at the edge of the woods when she overheard his panicked voice speaking to his Batark. "We have nothing, Mark. Nothing. The king will make an example of me. He will fly me alive in his throne room." Alistair's voice was a high-pitched whine. "We could offer people," Mark suggested, his tone low and grim. "Some of the younger Omegas, a tribute of flesh instead of gold. He might find that amusing, a cold dread colder than any winter wind washed over Sephora." He wouldn't. He couldn't. Offering up members of his own pack, especially Omegas who were meant to be cherished, was a craven, unforgivable act. But she knew Alistair. His fear would make him do anything to save his own skin. He would sacrifice Anna. He would sacrifice her. At that moment, something inside Sephora snapped. The quiet healer, the beautiful Omega, vanished. She thought of Anna's shallow breaths, the sound that haunted her sleep. She thought of the king on his cold throne, a distant monster who demanded sacrifice without seeing the faces of the sacrificed. Fear was a poison, and it had infected her alpha. But Soph would not drink it. She slipped back to her small cottage, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated resolve. She packed a small satchel with dried meat, a water skin, and a few precious remedies. She looked at her sleeping sister, her face pale in the moonlight, and pressed a kiss to her brow. "I will not let you die," she whispered. Alpha Alistaster was a coward. He would not stand before the king. Fine, she would. The journey to the Onyx Citadel was 3 days of grueling travel through dense ancient forests and over windswept hills. Safara moved with a quiet determination that belied her Omega status. She was not a warrior, but she was a creature of the earth. She knew which streams ran clean, which berries were safe, and how to tread so softly that the twigs barely cracked beneath her feet. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach. But her sister's fading image was a fire in her heart that burned hotter than any fear. The Onyx Citadel was not a castle. It was a scar upon the landscape, a fortress of black volcanic rock that clawed at the sky, surrounded by sheer cliffs and patrolled by warriors whose grim faces matched the stone they guarded. The air itself grew heavier as she approached, thick with the scent of power iron, and something ancient and predatory. The overwhelming aura of the Alpha King. It was a scent that made the Omega instincts inside her scream, to submit, to flatten herself to the ground and show her throat. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, and forced herself to walk on. She arrived on the morning of the conclave. The great courtyard was a tense sea of werewolves from every pack in the territories. Hulking alphas flanked by their boss postured and growled their fine furs and polished leathers, doing little to hide the anxiety that rolled off them in waves. They all fell silent when she walked past. A lone Omega unescorted her clothes, simple and travel-stained, walking towards the entrance of the great hall. It was like watching a lamb walk willingly into a wolf's den. She ignored their stares, their whispers, their scorn. Her focus was on the massive iron-banded doors before her. The throne room was a cavern of shadows and echoes. Banners bearing the crest of a snarling gray wolf hung from the high-vaulted ceiling. The air was frigid. At the far end of a long black marble floor sat the throne, and upon it, the king. The stories had not done him justice. Kellen the Unbroken was less a man and more a force of nature. He was immense, his black tunic and leather breeches stretched to over a physique that was all brutal power. His long black hair was pulled back from a face that was hard angles and unforgiving lines. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were silver glowing with a faint inner light, and they missed nothing. He listened as alpha after alpha approached, knelt, and presented their tribute with trembling hands and flowery words of loyalty. He rarely spoke, offering only a curt nod or a low, dismissive grunt that made powerful alphas flinch. Safara watched from the shadows near the entrance, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw Alpha Alistair near the back of the crowd, pale and sweating, trying to make himself as small as possible. He hadn't brought Omegas. It seemed his cowardice had won out entirely, and he planned to simply not present himself at all. A fool's plan. The king would hunt him down for the insult. Finally, the herald called to Alpha Alistair of the Silverine pack. Silence. Alistair shrank further into the crowd. The king's silver eyes narrowed, a low growl beginning to rumble in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the very stones of the floor. The tension in the room became a physical thing, sharp and suffocating. This was her moment. Before she could lose her nerve, Sapphira took a breath and stepped out of the shadows. She walked the long path down the black marble floor, each step echoing in the dead silence. The eyes of every alpha in the room were on her. She could feel their shock, their disbelief, but she did not look at them. She looked only at the giant on the throne. She stopped a respectful distance from the deity, but she did not kneel. She did not bow her head. She met his gaze. "Where is your alpha?" Kellen's voice was a deep, growly bass, a sound of grinding stones that held no warmth, only impatience. "He is indisposed, your majesty," Sapphira said, her own voice shockingly clear and steady. "I am Sapphira, a healer of the Silver Stream. I have come to speak for my pack." A murmur rippled through the assembled alphas. An Omega speaking for her pack to the king. It was unheard of. Kellen's expression didn't change, but a dangerous light flickered in his silver eyes. "An Omega," he stated the word, "an insult. Your pack sends an Omega to beg for them." "I haven't come to beg, Alpha King," she replied, lifting her chin. I have come to offer a bargain. Now the murmurs turned to gasps. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Kellen leaned forward slightly, his massive hands resting on the arms of his throne. The predator was now fully focused on the prey. You are in no position to bargain. Your tribute is late, and your alpha is a coward. Your pack is forfeit. Our pack is starving. Saphira countered her voice, ringing with a passion that defied her station. Your tithes are too high. You demand golden grain, but you leave us with blight and sickness. My own sister lies dying because we lack the resources to acquire the herbs to save her. Is this the stability you offer? A quiet, well-ordered graveyard. The throne room was so silent now that one could hear a pin drop. No one had ever spoken to the king with such raw, accusatory truth. His guards tensed their hands, flying to their swords. The alphas looked on in horrified fascination, certain they were about to witness her execution. Kellen rose slowly from his throne. He was a mountain, uncoiling. He descended the 3 steps of the dais and stalked towards her, his presence a physical blow that made her want to stagger back. But she held her ground. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up into his face. The scent of him was overwhelming pine winter frost and pure, undiluted alpha power. For the first time he was close enough, and for the first time he truly smelled her. Beneath her fear, beneath her defiance, was a scent that cut through the haze of rage and power that always surrounded him. It was the scent of night-blooming jasmine and fresh rain, a scent of wild, untamed purity. It was a scent his wolf had been searching for its entire existence. Mate, the word slammed into his mind with the force of a physical blow. He froze his body rigid, the silver in his eyes swirling like a captured storm. This defiant, impossible little Ômega was his. Soph saw the shift in his eyes, the flicker of shock and confusion. She didn't understand it, but she knew it was her only chance. Here is my bargain, King Kellen. She pressed her voice lower now, more intense. Silverstream cannot pay its tribute this season, but I am the best healer in the Northern Territories. I have studied agriculture, crop rotation, and soil renewal. Grant my pack a reprieve for 1 year. In return, I will give you my service. I will work in your greenhouses, tend to your sick, and show your people how to triple their harvests. By next year, the territories will be so prosperous. Our tribute will seem a pittance. Deny me, and you gain nothing but the dust of one more failed pack. Kellen stared down at her, his mind a war zone. His alpha instincts roared at him to claim her, to drag her away, to mark her as his. His kingly discipline screamed that she was insubordinate, that he should make an example of her. But the calculating ruler, the one who had built an empire from chaos, saw the logic in her words. More than that, he was utterly, irrevocably intrigued. This creature was not a lamb. She was a lioness in a lamb's skin. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the terrified alphas. The conclave is concluded, he boomed. Leave. There was a frantic scramble as the alphas, desperate to escape the charged atmosphere, practically ran from the hall. In moments, the vast throne room was empty, save for the king, the Ômega, and his personal guard. Kellen looked back down at Saphira. The storm in his eyes had not subsided. You have courage, healer, he rumbled. You are a fool. We shall find out which. He turned and began walking back to his throne. You will not return to Silverstream. You will remain here at the Citadel. You will have my greenhouses and my medical wards. You will prove your claim. If you succeed, your pack will be spared. If you fail, he let the threat hang in the air, heavy and absolute. You will learn what it truly means to defy a king. Saphira's blood ran cold, but she did not let it show. She had stepped into the lion's den, and the lion had just closed the door behind her. Saphira was not led to a dungeon, as she had half expected, but to a suite of rooms in the cold northern spire of the Onyx Citadel. They were Spartan but clean, with a narrow bed, a simple wooden desk, and a window that overlooked a bleak, windswept courtyard. It was a gilded cage, and she was his only prisoner. Her keeper and guide was the king's beta, Elias. He was the opposite of Kellen in almost every way of average height, with sandy hair, a lean build, and a face that was perpetually etched with a calm, watchful expression. His eyes, a soft hazel, held a glimmer of intelligence, but revealed little of his thoughts. He treated her with a cool, professional courtesy that was almost more unnerving than open hostility. "The king has commanded that you be given all you require," Elias stated on her first morning, his voice even. "The primary greenhouse is this way. It has fallen into disuse." Disuse was a charitable term. The greenhouse was a skeleton of rusted iron and shattered glass panes. The inside was a tangle of dead, thorny vines, the soil hard-packed and barren. It was a monument to neglect. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air crept down Safara's spine. This wasn't a task. It was a sentence. He was setting her up to fail. The king expects to see new growth before the first snow. Elias added, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage. The first snows on Blackwood Ridge often come early. He left her there alone in the graveyard of a garden. For a long moment, Saf felt the crushing weight of despair. She was alone, a pariah in the king's stronghold, given an impossible task with her sister's life as the price of failure. But then the image of Anna's smile, weak but precious, flashed in her mind. Despair was a luxury she could not afford. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Her days fell into a grueling rhythm. She would rise before dawn, clearing the greenhouse shard by shard, vine by vine. The castle staff, under orders, provided her with tools and supplies, but kept their distance, watching her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She worked until her muscles screamed and her hands were raw and blistered. In the evening, she would study. Elias had granted her access to the Citadel's library, a vast, dust-choked archive of ancient texts. She devoured books on mountain agriculture, bot and engineering, searching for solutions to the challenges of high-altitude gardening. Kellen watched her from a distance. He would stand at a high window in his solar, a shadow observing the small, determined figure toiling in the ruined greenhouse. His wolf was a restless beast in his chest, clawing at his insides, demanding he go to her, claim her, sent her. He fought it with the iron will that had made him king. A mate was a weakness. A connection was a vulnerability. His parents, the former king and queen, had been compassionate rulers who trusted their inner circle. They were murdered for it, betrayed by their closest friend. Kellen had been 16 when he'd found their bodies. He had avenged them, bathed his claws in the blood of the traitors, and sworn on their graves that he would never make the same mistake. His heart was a tomb, and it would remain so. But he couldn't stop watching her. He saw the way she meticulously tested the soil, adding nutrients from the castle's compost heaps. He saw her designing a clever irrigation system using collected rainwater. He saw her patiently mending the broken glass panes with salvaged materials. She did not complain. She did not weep. She simply worked. One evening, unable to stay away, he descended to the greenhouse. He found her standing in the center of the now cleared structure, her face smudged with dirt, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sketched a design on a piece of slate. "You have cleared the rot," he observed, his voice making her jump. She turned her eyes wide for a moment before her composure settled. "The foundation is good. The structure is sound. It was just neglected." She looked him directly in the eye, and he felt a subtle challenge in her words, "like you." "The soil is acidic," he stated, testing her. "The mountain's geology makes it so. Nothing of substance has grown here for a generation." "I know," she replied calmly. "I've been adding crushed eggshells and wood ash from the castle kitchens to neutralize it. It will take time, but it will recover." He was taken aback by the simple practicality of her answer. He had expected supplication or fear. Instead, he got a bot lesson. It was infuriating and captivating. The scent of her jasmine rain, and now the clean smell of honest sweat and rich earth, was making his head spin. "Your sister," he said abruptly, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "What ails her?" Safara's posture stiffened. "It is called the fading breath. It is a sickness of the lungs. The cold, damp air of the valley exacerbates it. And the cure, a tea made from the petals of Selena flora," she said, the technical name slipping out before she corrected herself. "The moon petal flower. It only grows on sun-facing alpine slopes above the treeing. It is rare and it grows on your lands." He said nothing, simply staring at her. She was not just a healer, she was a scholar. Her intelligence was as potent as her scent. He felt a dangerous, unfamiliar emotion unfurling in his chest. It felt terrifyingly like respect. "The first snow will be here in a month," he said, his voice, a harsh rasp as he fought his inner turmoil. "Your time is running out, Gardner." He turned and strode away before he did something foolish, like reaching out to brush the smudge of dirt from her cheek. Saf watched him go, her heart thudding. He was a terrifying, broken man, a king encased in ice. But she had seen something in his eyes again. That same flicker of confused humanity she'd seen in the throne room. And she sensed that the barren greenhouse was not the only thing in this cold, dark citadel that she was being tasked to bring back to life. A month passed. The first hints of autumn began to paint the lower valleys in hues of gold and crimson. But on Blackwood Ridge, the air grew a sharper edge, a promise of the brutal winter to come. Inside the greenhouse, however, a miracle was taking root. Under Safara's tireless care, the once barren soil was now dark and rich. Tiny green shoots were pushing their way towards the light, hardy mountain vegetables, resilient medicinal herbs, and cold weather grains. It was a small, fragile rebellion of life against the encroaching cold, and it was all her doing. She had earned a grudging respect from the castle staff. The cooks would now save the best compost for her without being asked. A gruff old blacksmith named Jacob had helped her repair the rusted ironwork. They still feared the king too much to be openly friendly, but their quiet assistance was a balm to her lonely existence. Her interactions with Kellen remained strained and infrequent. He would appear like a storm cloud at the edge of her garden, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. He would ask curt questions about her progress, his silver eyes missing no detail. Each time she would answer with the same calm, unwavering professionalism. Each conversation was a battle of wills, a test of her nerve, and each time he left, she would sag with relief, her hands trembling slightly. The pull between them was a living thing, a taut wire of unspoken tension that left her breathless. She knew what it was, the ancient, undeniable call of the mate bond. It terrified her as much as he did. The breaking point came not from a word, but from a wound. Kellen was training with his elite guard in the courtyard, a brutal, no-holds-bar display of combat. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was unnatural for a man his size, his body a blur of controlled violence. Saphira watched from her window, mesmerized and horrified. During a sparring match with three warriors at once, one of the men, a new recruit, panicked. He feinted with his sword, but lunged with a hidden dagger, a move of desperation rather than malice. Kellen disarmed him with contemptuous ease, but not before the dagger's edge sliced deep across his forearm. It was a significant wound gushing dark blood onto the cobblestones. The pack healers rushed forward, but Kellen snarled a sound that was more wolf than man and waved them away. "It is nothing." He growled his pride, a shield thicker than any armor. He stalked back into the citadel, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Saphira didn't hesitate. She grabbed her satchel of remedies and followed the trail to his solar. She found him standing by the fire, his back to her, attempting to wrap the wound with a strip of cloth in his non-dominant hand. It was a clumsy, ineffective effort. "That needs to be stitched and cleaned or it will fester," she said from the doorway. He spun around, his eyes blazing. "I didn't summon a healer." "I am aware," she said, stepping into the room. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice even. "But I cannot stand by while my king risks losing an arm to his own stubbornness. Your life is the life of the territories. To protect it is my duty, same as yours." Her appeal to his duty, the very concept he had built his reign upon, caught him off guard. He stared at her, his jaw tight. For a tense moment, she thought he would throw her out. Then, with a low growl of frustration, he slumped into a large armchair and thrust his bleeding arm towards her. "Be quick about it." She knelt before him, setting her supplies on the floor. Her hands were steady as she gently unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The cut was deep, right down to the muscle. "This will hurt," she murmured, beginning to clean the wound with an antiseptic solution. He didn't so much as flinch, his body as still as the stone of his fortress. But she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the corded muscles in his neck. This was the closest she had ever been to him. The scent of him, pine and frost, was so potent it made her dizzy. As her fingers brushed against his skin, a jolt like lightning shot up her arm. She saw his eyes flash silver, his nostrils flaring. The mate bond roar an undeniable spark between them in the silence of the room. As she worked, threading a needle with a sterilized gut, the silence stretched thick with unspoken things. Why? He finally rasped, his voice rough. Why did you truly come here? Not for your pack, not for a bargain. You walked into my throne room expecting to die. Saphira didn't look up from her work, her focus on the neat, precise stitches she was laying. My sister Anna, she said softly. Her breaths are like whispers of snow. Each one could be her last. I would walk into 1,000 throne rooms if it meant she might see another spring. The raw, selfless love in her voice struck a chord deep inside him, a place he thought had died with his parents. He looked at the top of her head, at the way her simple brown hair caught the firelight. He had ruled for a decade, surrounded by those who wanted his power, his title, his wealth. He had never been surrounded by anyone who simply wanted to save someone they loved. When she finished the last stitch and began applying a healing salve, his hand, his uninjured one, moved of its own accord. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. The touch was feather-like, yet it seared them both. Saphira froze her breath, catching in her throat. She slowly looked up, and for the first time the ice in his eyes had melted. In their silver depths she saw not a king or a monster, but a man drowning in a sea of loneliness, so vast it stole her breath. He pulled his hand back as if it was burning. The mask of the king slammed back into place, but it was too late. They had both seen behind it. My parents, he said, his voice a low, haunted whisper. They were betrayed by my father's beta, his sworn brother, a man named Lucien. I found them in the throne room. Lucien was standing over them, a bloody sword in his hand. He smiled at me. Kellen's bandaged hand clenched into a fist. I was 16, my wolf took me. When the red rage cleared, Lucien and his co-conspirators were gone. I was left with a crown, a ruined kingdom, and one truth trust is a blade you hand to your enemy. Saphira's heart ached. The tyrant king, the unbroken alpha, was a boy who had been forced to become a monster to survive. All his cruelty, all his harshness was a desperate attempt to control a world that had ripped his own apart. She finished bandaging his arm, her touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long. Trust is not a blade, she whispered, her gaze holding his. It is a seed. If you plant it in barren soil, it will die. But if you nurture it, it can grow into a forest strong enough to hold up the sky. She stood, gathered her things, and left him there, sitting in the firelight, staring at the arm she had mended. Kellen did not move for a long time. The physical wound on his arm barely registered. It was the other wound, the ancient festering one on his soul, that had just been touched by something that felt dangerously like healing. And the Omega healer was the one holding the cure. Saphir's act of healing the king and his acceptance of it sent seismic shockwaves through the Onyx Citadel. It was a subtle shift, but a significant one. Whispers followed her now, not of scorn, but of awe and curiosity. The guards nodded to her with a newfound respect. Elias, the ever-watchful beta, treated her with a new, more complex caution. He saw the crack in his alpha's armor, and her name was Saf. Kellen, for his part, was a man in conflict. He found himself manufacturing reasons to visit the greenhouse, now a thriving oasis of green under the mended glass. He would ask about soil pH levels or germination rates, but his questions were a flimsy pretext. What he truly wanted was to be near her, to breathe in her scent, to listen to the calm, steady sound of her voice. He began requesting her presence at his evening meals. They would sit in the cavernous dining hall, a long, polished table between them, and speak of her work. He never spoke of his past again, but she could see the war still raging behind his eyes. He was thawing, and this change was not going unnoticed outside the Citadel's walls. News of the Omega Queen, as some were starting to call her, spread like wildfire through the territories. To many, it was a sign of hope, a whisper of a new era of compassion. To others, it was a sign of the king's weakness. One such alpha was Lord Valerius of the Iron Fang Pack. Ambitious, handsome, and utterly ruthless, Valerius had long coveted Kellen's throne. He saw Kellen's iron-fisted rule not as a strength, but a brittle leanness that could be shattered. The appearance of Saf was the crack he had been waiting for, an Omega influencing the king. It was an insult to the natural order. It was leverage. Valerius began to subtly stoke the fires of dissent. He sent emissaries to the disgruntled Pax, speaking of the king's unnatural preoccupation and his neglect of state affairs. He found a particularly eager ally in a humiliated, bitter Alpha, nursing a grudge Alastair of Silverstream. Banished from the king's sight and a laughingstock in his own pack, Alastair was desperate for revenge. He became Valerius's ears, feeding him information about the growing influence of the healer who had usurped his place. But their conspiracy had a third, far more dangerous member, one hidden in plain sight. Elias, the loyal beta, the king's right hand. He was not loyal. Elias was the son of Lucian, the man Kellen had slaughtered for treason a decade ago. He had watched from the shadows as Kellen's rage had descended upon his family. He had survived only by hiding his identity, changing his name, and biding his time. He had worked his way up the ranks with a display of impeccable loyalty and efficiency, becoming the one man, the king who trusted no one almost trusted. His hatred for Kellen was a cold, patient thing, a poison he had nurtured for 10 long years. His plan had always been to dismantle Kellen's empire from the inside, to turn the Pax against him, to leave him as broken and alone as Kellen had left him. Safara's arrival had been an unforeseen complication. At first, he saw her as a threat to his plans, but now he saw her as the perfect weapon. She was Kellen's sole vulnerability. To destroy her would be to destroy the last flicker of light within the king, plunging him into a darkness from which he would never return. Elias played his part perfectly. To Kellen, he was the concerned beta. Alpha, the other Pax are restless, he would say with feigned concern. They see your favor towards the Omega as a sign that you are losing your edge. Perhaps it would be wise to send her away to quell the rumors. To Safara, he was a sympathetic ally. The king is a difficult man, he told her one day as he met her by the greenhouse. He has been alone for so long. Your presence here, it is a good thing, but be careful. Many are jealous of your influence. He was a master manipulator, subtly poisoning Kellen's mind with doubt while positioning himself as Saf's confidant. The twist of the knife came with the moon petals. As the first snows began to dust the highest peaks, Safara knew time was running out for Anna. She had proven her worth 10 times over. The greenhouse was a marvel, and she had already helped the castle healers diagnose and treat a dozen ailments that had stumped them. She finally gathered the courage to formally petition the king. She found him in the strategy room, staring down at a map of the territories. Kellen, she began using his name for the first time without a title. He looked up, his silver eyes softening almost imperceptibly. The first snow has fallen on the peaks. My sister, I know, he interrupted his voice. Lo, I have not forgotten my promise. He turned to Elias, who stood silently in the corner. Elias assembled a party of 5 of my best foragers. They will escort the healer up the eastern slope at dawn. They are to bring back enough moon petal to last the winter. Of course, my king, Elias said with a smooth bow, but inside his mind was racing. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. That night, Elias sent a secret message via a trusted courier to Lord Valerius. It read, "The prize, leave the fortress at dawn, eastern slope near the old Hunter's Pass. Make it look like a rogue attack. Leave no survivors." He then went to Safara's chambers. He found her packing a small bag for the climb. The king is placing a great deal of trust in you, Elias said, his voice warm, and in me to arrange your security, but I must confess I am worried. The eastern slope is known for rogue wolf activity. Kelsgard is the best, but I fear 5 may not be enough. Saphira looked up, a flicker of concern on her face. What do you suggest? I have taken the liberty of arranging a contingency, Elias said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. A small secondary party of my own loyal men will travel by a different route and meet you near the summit. They will ensure your absolute safety. But the king must not know. His pride would be wounded if he thought I had questioned his judgment. This will be our secret. Safara, who had come to see Elias as a reasonable and cautious friend in a court of shadows, felt a wave of gratitude. Thank you, Elias. I am in your debt. Think nothing of it. he said with a small smile. We all want what is best for the kingdom. He walked away the perfect picture of a loyal beta, but in his heart, a cold triumph bloomed. He had just sent her into a perfectly orchestrated trap. Kellen's guards would be overwhelmed by Valerius's men, who would be expecting them, and his own loyal men would be there not to save her, but to ensure that if Valerius failed, she would not make it back down the mountain alive. Either way, by sunset tomorrow, the king's mate would be dead, and Kellen's world would finally irrevocably break. The air on the mountain grew thin and sharp as a blade, each breath a small victory against the cold. Sapphira climbed with Kellen's 5 best royal guards, the hope for her sister, a small, warm fire in her chest. The king had given her a small, carved wolf pendant before she left, a token of his protection. She clutched it in her pocket, the smooth wood, a connection to the complicated Alpha, who was slowly letting her past his walls of ice. They were nearing the old Hunter's Pass, a narrow ravine flanked by dense snow-dusted woods, when the pristine silence of the mountain shattered. The ambush was brutally efficient. A dozen warriors, their pelts marked with the snarling iron fang of Lord Valerius's pack, burst from the trees. They were not desperate rogues, they were a disciplined war party. Kell's guards, though elite, were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The world became a chaotic symphony of clanging steel and the guttural snarls of shifting wolves. The captain of the guard shoved Sapphira behind a large boulder. "Stay down!" he roared before the tide of battle consumed him. Panic seized her, but it was quickly followed by a cold, sharp clarity. She watched as one of the Iron Fang warriors cut down a guard and turned his leering gaze on her. But before he could advance, another man intercepted him, driving a sword through his chest. For a fleeting second, relief washed over Sapphira. It was one of Elias's men from the contingency party he had promised would ensure her safety. Then the man turned and she saw his eyes. There was no rescue in them, only the cold, hard purpose of an executioner. The horrifying truth hit her like a physical blow. Elias hadn't sent a rescue party. He had sent assassins to finish the job. The trap wasn't just for her, it was designed around her. Back in the Onyx Citadel, Kellen paced his solar, a caged beast tormented by a danger he could not see. The mate bond was a frantic, screaming thing in his soul, a phantom cord being stretched to its breaking point. He could feel her terror as if it were his own. "My king, you seem troubled," Elias said, entering the room with his usual placid demeanor. "She is perfectly safe. As I assured you, I sent a secondary party to shadow them from a distance. She is well protected." The lie was smooth as glass, but as Elias spoke, Kellen's wolf-sharp eyes caught a detail no one else would. A tiny dark stain on the cuff of his beer sleeve, almost hidden by his bracer. It was dried blood. Elias had been in the Citadel all morning. There was no reason for it to be there. The blood and the screaming in his soul coalesced into a single sickening realization. The secondary party wasn't a protection detail. It was a kill squad. "You," Kellen whispered, the single word dripping with a dawning apocalyptic fury. He turned from the window, and the silver in his eyes began to burn with the light of a dying star. Elias saw the look on his king's face and knew the game was over. His calm mask fell away, replaced by a triumphant sneer. "She was your weakness, Kellen. Your one flaw, a disease, and I have cured you." The rage Kellen had kept chained for a decade did not just break free, it vaporized its restraints. He didn't roar. The transformation was so violent, it seemed to suck the air from the room. His human form ripped apart as the monstrous gray wolf of legend burst forth, a creature of nightmare and power that had to stoop to keep its head from scraping the stone ceiling. With a snarl that shook the citadel to its foundations, the Alpha King launched himself from the window, landing in the courtyard below. And sprinting towards the mountain, a gray thunderbolt of pure vengeance. On the slope, Sapphire scrambled away from Elias's assassin. Her mind raced. Betrayal. It was all a lie. Just as the assassin raised his sword for the final blow, a howl tore through the air, a sound of such world-breaking fury that it vibrated in her very bones. It was Kellen. The assassin froze his eyes wide with a primal terror that transcended training and loyalty. In that moment of hesitation, Saf acted. She grabbed a heavy, jagged rock and slammed it with all her might into the back of his knee. With a wet crack, the joint gave way, and he went down screaming. She didn't look back. She ran, scrambling up the rocky side of the ravine. From her new vantage point, she saw Kellen arrive. He was not a wolf fighting. He was a natural disaster. He crashed into the remaining Iron Fang warriors, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, dispatching them with horrifying ease. It was then she saw the assassin she'd crippled, crawling for a discarded crossbow. He loaded it, his hands shaking, and took aim not at the rampaging king, but directly at her. He knew what would truly kill the king. "Kellen!" she screamed, his massive wolf head snapped up. He saw her. He saw the assassin. He abandoned his prey and launched himself toward her, but he was too far. The bolt flew a black streak against the white snow. She braced for the impact. It never came. The guard captain, the man she thought was already dead, had used the last of his strength to lurch to his feet and throw himself in front of her. The bolt struck him squarely in the chest. He collapsed at her feet with a final shuddering gasp, his last act one of perfect loyalty. The sacrifice and the king's terrifying arrival broke the attackers completely. The survivors dropped their weapons and fled into the woods. Kellen reached the ridge, shifting back into his human form in a swirl of primal energy. He was naked, splattered with blood, but he had eyes only for her. He rushed to her side, his hands hovering over her, frantically checking for injuries, his face a mask of raw terror and profound relief. "You're alive," he breathed the words ragged. Sophira's gaze moved from the dead captain at her feet to the carnage below, then back to the man who had torn the world apart for her. Her strength gave out, and she collapsed into him. He caught her, wrapping his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could feel the frantic beat of his heart. Surrounded by blood and betrayal, the Alpha King finally held his mate, and the cold of the mountain was no match for the fire of his rage. The return to the Onyx Citadel was a grim procession led by a king whose silence was more terrifying than any roar. Kellen himself carried the body of the loyal captain, laying him upon a ceremonial bier in the center of the great hall. Elias, they discovered, had vanished, having fled the moment he knew his plan had failed. Kellen's justice was swift and absolute. "This is the price of betrayal," he boomed to his assembled warriors, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Elias conspired with Lord Valerius and the coward Alistair to murder your future queen. Hunt them down. Bring me Valerius and Alistair in chains. But Elias, you bring his head to me on a spike." The king's wrath was a storm that swept across the territories. Within days, the traitors were dragged back. The final confrontation took place in the throne room, the same hall where Saphir had first defied him. Valerius and Alistair knelt trembling, but Elias, though wounded and captured, was defiant to the last. "I want to know why," Kellen demanded, his voice a low growl from the throne. Sapphira stood beside him, her hand on his arm, a silent, unwavering source of strength. Elias laughed a dry, broken sound. "My father was Lucian. You murdered him on this very floor for daring to believe your father was a weak fool. I have spent 10 years dreaming of this day, of leaving you as broken as you left me. Your father was a traitor who murdered his king and sworn brother for power." Kellen stated, his voice flat and cold. "I gave him justice." "He was a visionary," Elias spat, "and you were becoming just like him, soft, letting an Omega poison your mind." Kellen rose, a towering figure of judgment. "You are right, I was becoming my father. I was embracing his strength, which you mistook for weakness. Saphira did not make me weak. She reminded me that a kingdom held by fear alone is brittle. It needs a heart. You tried to rip the heart out of this kingdom," he gestured to the guards. Valerius and Alistair were dragged to the dungeons to await a just trial, not a summary execution. Kellen's reign of pure vengeance was over. "But you, Kellen," said his silver eyes, locking onto Elias, "your crime was personal. The duel that followed was not a contest. It was an exorcism. Kellen, fighting not with the blind rage of a beast, but with the focused power of a king protecting his future, dismantled Elias's defenses. He ended the fight, and the cycle of hatred his father's death had begun with a single precise blow. The ghost of the past was finally laid to rest. In the aftermath, a heavy silence fell over the citadel. Kellen Thor victorious was shattered. The betrayal of the man he had almost trusted had ripped open the old wounds of his parents' murder. He retreated into the cold fortress of his soul, pushing everyone, including Safara, away. She found him in his solar, staring into the flames, a king drowning in the ghosts of his past. "You think you are a curse," she said softly, walking to stand before him. "You believe you bring ruin to everyone you let close. Look at the evidence." He rasped, his voice hollow. "My parents, my captain." "Elias, stop!" She commanded her above, ringing with a strength that cut through his despair. She took his face in her hands, forcing his haunted silver eyes to meet hers. Their choices were their own. Greed, loyalty, hatred, those were their paths. They do not define you, and they will not define me. She pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of profound intimacy. "I am not your weakness, Kellen. I am your strength, and you are mine. Stop trying to bear the weight of this crown alone. Let me help you carry it." A tremor ran through his massive frame. A single tear, the first in a decade, traced a path down his stone-carved cheek. He pulled her into a desperate embrace, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent of jasmine and rain as if it were the only air in the world. He finally let go of the pain, the loneliness, the belief that he was destined to be a monster. In its place, he allowed her love, the unwavering truth of the mate bond, to flood his soul and make him whole. That night, their mating was a sacred vow, two fractured souls forging an unbreakable union. The dawn that followed was the dawn of a new era, a royal decree and a wagon filled with supplies, and the precious moon petal flowers were sent to Silverstream. Anna would see another spring. Kellen stood on the balcony overlooking his kingdom, but he was not alone. Beside him stood Saphira, his queen. He was still the Alpha King, a figure of immense power, but his strength was now tempered by her compassion, his rule guided by their shared wisdom. The unbroken king had finally been healed by the one fearless Omega who dared to stand before him and see not a monster, but a man. And so the reign of the Alpha King was transformed. The fear he once commanded slowly turned to a fierce, unwavering respect, not just for his power, but for the wisdom of his Omega Queen. Safara not only healed a king, but an entire kingdom, proving that true strength isn't found in a closed fist, but in an open hand. Their story reminds us that even the hardest hearts can be taught to love again, and that the quietest voice can roar loud enough to change the world. What did you think of Kellen and Safara's journey? Was Elias's betrayal the most shocking twist, or was it the moment an Omega stood up to a king? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. If you were captivated by their story and want to hear more epic tales of romance, defiance, and fated mates, make sure you smash that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good story. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to join our pack.